There have been some people who have had objections to the use of the singular they as opposed to he or she or just universal he, or to the use of other gender-neutral pronouns. There's one professor in particular whose name I would not dream of saying, who has said that it is thought policing and interfering with his freedom of thought to suggest that he ought to use whatever pronoun a student asks him to use. Now, I just wanted to, I'm not going to go on long about the freedom of thought angle because, I mean, it's obviously false. We all know that we think all sorts of things that we would never dream of saying to people. I can tell you, anytime I drive a car on the highway, I think a lot of things about the other people on the highway, not one of which I actually say to them. There's nothing keeping me from thinking things without saying them. So the question, therefore, let's just go straight to the question of whether we say it. There are basically 5 reasons that people tend to give for saying that we should go with he and she, or just gender-neutral he, and not with singular they, or with sie, or hin, or any of the other gender-neutral pronouns that might be requested. And I'm going to go through these one by one and address each one of them in luxurious length. 1, that's the way English has always been. Which, by the way, is always a wrong argument. Anybody who says English has always been any given way is already wrong, as you will see. Number 2, it was fine up until recently. Number 3, that's the way languages are, duh. Number 4, that's the way reality is. Lobsters and mice and things like that are all he and she, and so you always call them all he. Number 5, it would be a free-for-all otherwise. So, let's start with number 1. That's the way English always has been. What's Old English? Many people, if you say Old English, they think, oh, it's like, whateth, thinketh, thoueth, ofeth, thateth, and all this fake Shakespeare. Here is Old English. What? Wegar dena in yer dagum, theat kuniga thrum je frunon, who the avelingas ellen fremadon. This is the beginning of Beowulf, which was written about 1400 years ago, give or take. That is what English used to be. If it looks more like Icelandic, I'm sure we all speak Icelandic around here, that's because it is more like Icelandic. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, was a professor of Old English, and he had several Icelandic nannies for his children, and he found he could often converse with them some in Icelandic. Perfectly unnecessary, because all Icelanders speak better English than you or I do. I know, I'm doing that. This basically says, yo, we spear Danes in days of yours, let's see, of hero kings, great deeds have sung, how the sons of Atheling did wonderful things. And that's not even in the right order. Fremadon means did. So, Old English had, first of all, 3 genders. 3 grammatical genders. And masculine, feminine, and neuter. This is a nice cheat sheet of all the inflectional paradigms. I'm going to ask, first of all, who here speaks a language such as Russian or Polish or German that has full inflection, 3 genders? Well, if you ever decide to learn one, this is what you're up against. So in English, basically, if we say, okay, the boat sailed, he sailed the boat, he threw it at the boat, it's the boat's sail. And these are, basically, it's all the same form except for the possessive, the boat's sail, or the plural, the boat's sail, or the sails of the boats. And it all sounds the same. Well, it was bot and bot for whether it's a subject or object. Botus if it was, and that means boat, by the way, if it was the genitive, which is to say the possessive. Bate, if you're giving it to the boat, that's all singular. In plural, it's batas, bata, and batum. And likewise, ship, thing, shinu, glove, nama, era, sonna, sono. I can't even remember what shinu means, probably shin. Name, ear, sun, no, the other kind of sun. And then sun, no, the other kind of sun. Thing, by the way, means thing or gathering. But this, you can see this whole inflectional paradigm. Every word, not just people and animate creatures, every word had a gender, and every word changed its form according to its position in the sentence, and the adjectives that modified it also changed. I suspect that many of the people in here know at least some French, and you know that you have to change the adjective a little bit depending on what it's modifying. Well, this is grammatical gender. Grammatical gender is an arbitrary system of torture, inflection, that basically allows you to say what bits go with what bit. And it may seem like a lot to learn and remember, but one of the upsides of it is, if, for instance, you're speaking Latin, which has a very thorough system of inflection, you can move the words around all you want, and you still know which ones are actually dancing with each other. It's like the way English is right now, because we inflect words so little, they all have to stay in the right order. It's like doing a Virginia reel or something. You have to be right across from your partner. When you have a fully inflecting word, you can have one of these dance floors like, at a standard college party where you're going to be dancing with somebody who just happens to be on the other side of the room at the moment, but you'll get back together and everybody figures it out. What this also meant was we had a whole bunch of forms of definite article, not just the. So the could be se, that, or ser, depending on masculine, feminine, neuter, but also the pronouns. He was he. Pronunciation changed. It was hit. She was hail. Hail. Hail means she. He means her. Hira means her. And hira means her. Because we use her to mean multiple things in English. Possessive and accusative and dative. And you don't have to remember all these terms. Plural, they was actually here. Here, they're here, yeah. That's how it's pronounced, not high, but here. All of this was the system of pronouns. And remember that every noun had a gender, so regardless of what noun it was, whether it was a person or a thing, it used the different pronoun, just like it used the different definite article. So, the king was Sekuni. The ship was that ship. The queen was Ser Queen. Likewise, the boat was masculine, Sebat. The head, that Hevod, neuter. The book, Ser Book, feminine. But that weave, which means the woman or the wife, was neuter. The word was neuter. The word for woman was neuter. The word for youth, as in a youth gang, a bunch of young people, was Seoyoguth, which is feminine. When you have a bunch, imagine you're walking down the street and you see a bunch of guys, all around 12 to 15. They would, in Old English, as a collective, be feminine. In the individual, they could be masculine or neuter, depending on whether you call them boys or children. This also meant that the woman's, which we would say her, in Old English would use his as the possessive. So, all of this meant that the system in Old English, which our language is descended from, was nothing rather like the simple, straightforward, clear system that people envision it all having come from, where all male persons are he, and all female persons are she, and everything else is it, except for, boats and whales. There she blows. In Middle English, What happened was, how many of you know about the Norman Conquest? In 1066, a bunch of guys named Norman, a bunch of Norman French came across the Channel. They're originally Scandinavian, but they'd been in France for a while, and they picked up French. And they came across the Channel, and they took over England, and they brought French with them. Meanwhile, England had also been overrun on the north side by Danes and Norwegians. Modern English is as it is largely because the English speakers who were there, which, by the way, they were Anglo-Saxons who had come from Germany and displaced the Celts who had been there before, they got overrun by Scandinavians from 3 different directions. Many linguists will tell you that modern English is a Creole. What that means is that it's a language that was really formed from contact between multiple languages. So it's not like it came from just one language all the way down. It's not like modern German where you can trace it back to Old German. It actually has a substrate of grammar and core words that come from Germanic. And a lot of the vocabulary, about 80% of the higher level vocabulary, actually comes from French and other languages. So, what happens in a contact situation is you lose a lot of these inflectional endings. Because if you're coming to a place and you don't speak the language very well, but you still want to talk with people, you're going to use a stripped down version. The hard parts to remember are all those inflections. This happens all over the world all the time. It's been seen over and over again that when languages are in contact, things like inflections get stripped way down. At the same time, the pronoun use had already in late Old English started to match female pronouns to female persons regardless of grammatical gender. So the woman could be her instead of it. Compare modern German in this. Das Fräulein ist hier. Das Fräulein ist hier means the young woman, the young lady is here. The problem is that Fräulein, because it has line on the end of it, which is a diminutive suffix, is neuter. So not die Fräulein, das Fräulein. But you don't say es ist hier, you don't say it's here, you say she's here because she's still a she. And so they match the pronoun to the person's sex as opposed to the grammatical gender. Also, in Middle English, remember how she was hail and they was here? Well, between he, hail, and here, once it got struck down, they were all becoming he. And instead of doing a simple thing and being like, okay, well, let's just use he then, and make it everybody and not be it masculine, or make it any other pronoun, they brought in she and they. And that's different from saying in modern English, let's make it he, because by that time, he was already established as the masculine pronoun. We're getting there, folks. We're going to get to that. So, T. In Middle English, therefore, the, first of all those definite articles became the. That's it, the. This thing here, by the way, which looks like B or P put together, is thorn, which was a letter we used to have that stood for the or the. And then when they brought over typesets from the continent, they didn't have it. So they started using TH. And meanwhile, in writing, a lot of people simulated it with a Y. When you see ye old, that's actually that Y stands in for thorn. So it's the old. Now you know. The pronouns, he, him, his, him. Hit gradually became it. It's, by the way, the possessive it's, the one that's not supposed to have the apostrophe, that's actually even more recent. It was just brought in because it was felt that English speakers' lives are not quite difficult enough. She, again, became she and her from hail, and likewise, they. All of that came over from the Scandinavian languages. And then the printing press came in, Shakespeare came along, everything happened, and we got modern English. Shakespeare is, by the way, early modern English, technically. I mentioned that we have a tradition of using she for things like boats and whales. Just Just so we know, this is not a holdover from Old English. There are holdovers from Old English. When you say give it to them, as in give it to them, it's generally considered that that is from ham in Old English being carried forward, the Old English third person pronoun, as opposed to them. This may or may not be the case, but when we call a ship she, remember that ship was neuter and boat was masculine. When we say there she blows about a whale, well, while was masculine. So it's quite safe to assume that the reason that these sailors are using she for all these things is because you're on a ship full of, I'm not going to say seamen, I'm going to say sailors, and it's all guys, and everything that they want to dominate or attack or whatever, they're viewing as feminine. That seems a much more likely speculation. I don't have data for it, but I put money on it. So this is the way we actually have always used pronouns in modern English. It doesn't look very tidy, does it? You see the number dividing line shifts over a bit because we have the singular we, right? We are not amused by this, but we will do it. The royal we. You, the second person, you covers over into first person. You think, why, right? Well, we use you that way sometimes to mean I and sometimes to mean they, just as this indefinite thing. And we use they often in the third person. And we have for a very long time, as I'm going to show you. But the problem was that people who wanted English to be tidier felt that this was inappropriate. And I am about to get to the prescriptivists, who came up with all sorts of rules to tidy up English a lot more. And one of the things they decided that number line should go straight down. Somehow they still, you notice, by the way, you somehow cover singular and plural. That's because we used to have thou and thee, and now that's extremely archaic, and that was meant for just close friends, just like French tu and German du. But what happened was that we developed a general trend towards politeness where you would use the plural for anybody that you wanted to be polite to. And in the end, everybody's like, oh, heck, let's just be polite to everybody. That's what happened, actually. And now the only place where the exception is when the Bible was translated in the time of Shakespeare, they translated the second person applied to God as thou, the familiar term, because that's how it came to them from the Greek and Hebrew. And they said, well, we should still use that familiar singular. So now a lot of people think that thou is the most formal term you can possibly use because they've conjectured it must be because you only use it with God. Well, no. But tidying up has caused a lot of trouble in English. I don't recommend it unless somebody's paying you to do it. Number two, this brings us around to number two. It was fine up until recently. The idea that using he for everybody as the universal one was fine up until recently. This is a very common argument. It's one that I confess to having used myself in my youth because I was taught it. And at a certain point, it was pointed out to me that it was a stupid argument. And I said, oh, that's true. The singular they, as I was saying, has been used for indeterminate persons for a long time. It was used in the King James Bible. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. Each themselves, singular, plural. Why? So that they don't have to say himself. Shakespeare, there's not a man I meet but doth salute me, as if I were their well-acquainted friend. He says not a man, meaning not a person, as he would tend to do, but he uses there as a gender neutral. Jane Austen does it quite a bit. Anytime she writes everybody, it goes with not his, but their. But everybody has their own feeling, and everybody has a right to do what they like with their own money. Walt Whitman, everyone should delight us and we them. Everyone, them. You do not have to understand someone in order to love them. Lawrence Durrell. Also, an extremely good point. And in fact, if you did have to understand someone in order to love them, nobody ever would. Experience is the name everyone gives to their mistakes. Everyone gives to their mistakes. But some people felt that this was unnecessarily untidy. Was it just the untidiness? Let's have a little look at the history of gender ideology in English prescriptions. Gender ideology meaning the idea that one gender is the predominant, the preeminent. 1553, a bloke named Wilson in his Art of Rhetoric says, "Some will set the cart before the horse as thus, my mother and my father are both at home." Even as though the good man of the house wore no breeches or the grey mare with a better horse. He's objecting, you understand, to the person saying my mother and my father instead of my father and my mother. He feels that it is not good grammar to put the mother before the father. That is what he is saying. "And what though it often so happeneth, God wot the more pity, yet in speaking at the least, let us keep a natural order and set the man before the woman for manners' sake." Century later, the relative agrees with the antecedent in gender, number, and person. The relative shall agree in gender with the antecedent of the more worthy gender. Not even pretending here. As the king and the queen whom I honor, the masculine gender is more worthy than the feminine. I don't happen to agree with this. A century later, the masculine person answers to the general name which comprehends both male and female as any person who knows what he says. And so we see this has come up from the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and they're making these strained arguments at the same time as other people are using things like the singular they, saying, well, you know, men are more important than women, so we should just put the men first, always. This English grammar in 1795. Pronouns must always agree with their antecedents and the nouns for which they stand in gender, number, and person. But right away we see which this person considers more important, gender or number. Of this rule there are many violations. Each of the sexes should keep within its particular bounds and content themselves with the advantages of their particular districts. Can anyone on their entrance into the world fully secure that they shall not be deceived? No, should be on his entrance, Mr. Murray insists, and that he shall let each esteem others better than themselves than himself, he insists. He wants it to be he because it bothers him if anybody would suggest that it might not be he as the default. I wonder what his mother thought about that. And so in 1850, it made it all the way to an act of parliament. An act for shortening the language used in acts of parliament. In all acts, words importing the masculine gender shall be deemed and taken to include females, and the singular to include the plural, and the plural the singular, unless the contrary as to gender and number is expressly provided. But you know, not everybody wanted to do this. Everyday English, a grammar in 1880, after 3 centuries of telling people, no, use he. R.G. White writes, there is very commonly misused with reference to a singular noun. Even John Ruskin has written such a sentence as this. But if a customer wishes you to injure their foot or to disfigure it, you are to refuse their pleasure. Are we about camera restarting time?
Let's see, we're at 24, 28.
We can give it about another 3 minutes. Cool. Right. So, I mean, first I'm really very curious about the further context of this John Ruskin sentence, but it is perhaps an exemplification of the straits to which we are driven by the lack of a pronoun of common gender, meaning both he and she. He says, after saying that we can't use the one that they were using, but admitting this lack, the fact remains that his is the representative pronoun. Well, obviously that's not a fact because everybody's ignoring it. But admitting this lack, the fact remains that he is the representative pronoun, as mankind includes both men and women. Mr. Ruskin might better have said, if a customer wishes you to injure his foot, you are to refuse his pleasure. As though if a customer wished you to injure her foot, you could go ahead and stomp on it. I really want to find out what on earth Ruskin was thinking about. But also I want to find R.G. White and injure his foot. Lest we be of any uncertainty about Mr. White's motivations or attitudes, properly speaking, a man is not married to a woman or married with her, nor are a man and a woman married with each other. The woman is married to the man, the same Mr. White says. It is her name that is lost in his, not his and hers. She becomes a member of his family, not he of hers. It is her life that is merged or supposed to be merged in his, not his and hers. She follows his fortunes and takes his station, not he hers. This man sounds frightfully insecure to me. And I have more than a little to disagree with him in my particular marriage. I'm quite happy to say that my wife kept her name, which is frankly prettier than mine. It's Ara, mine's Harbeck, whatever. And she makes more money than I do too. And she's better with money too, so it really works out great. So H.W. Fowler, the famous Fowler of Fowler's Modern English, Archbishop Whately used to say that women were more liable than men to fall into this error, which error using they or them for the singular, as they objected to identifying everybody with him. Gosh. A linguist in Sterling Leonard's 1932 or before jury-based study of current English usage rejects each person should of course bear his or her share of the expense on the basis that, quote, I prefer simply his. This seems to be a matter of pleasing the women. Given that women make up more than half the population, don't you think you might want to please them from time to time? But beyond that, is he ever really truly neutral, even for the people who say that you can use a gender-neutral he? Some examples. The ideal that every boy and girl should be so equipped that he shall not be handicapped in his struggle for social progress. Does this sound right to you? She and Louis had a game. Who could find the ugliest photograph of himself? So always of Louis, right? Never. Everyone will be able to decide for himself whether or not to have an abortion. That really kind of cuts to the heart of it, doesn't it? I'm sure there are many lawmakers who felt that any man who wanted to have an abortion should be free to have one. Women, on the other hand. And this last one is actually a letter that was deliberately written as a counterexample to something said by William Safire, saying that you should use the singular he. The average American needs the small routines of getting ready for work. As he shaves or blow dries his hair or pulls on his pantyhose, he is easing himself by small stages into the demands of the day. Next silly argument. That's the way languages are. So, there are many different approaches to gender in pronouns in languages. As I've already pointed out, modern English does not have grammatical gender. We do not have grammatical gender in modern English. All nouns inflect the same freaking way. The only exception is irregular plurals. You know, man, men, deer, deer, fish, fish. I'm sure other examples could be brought to mind very quickly by people who aren't standing in front of a group of people talking at the same time. But we have sex-specific pronouns available unto us to use should we choose to do so. Chinese also has no genders grammatically. Chinese has extremely minimal inflection. Depending on how you analyze it, you could say it's a non-inflecting language. Mandarin, anyway. But interestingly, Chinese, when you speak Mandarin, he or she is ta. But if you write it, since about 100 years ago, or even a bit less, they have a separate form for she. So the one on the left there is he, and the one on the right takes that one and removes the radical meaning person or man and replaces it with one meaning woman, just because Western influence said, well, we want to know if you're writing about a man or a woman. Is that so much to ask? And they said, oh, well, okay, fine. Well, yeah, it was so much to ask. Come on, it's their language, but whatever. Japanese has gendered pronouns, but no gender. Finnish, Estonian, Hungarian, Turkish, Vietnamese, no grammatical gender, no gendered pronouns. Many languages have two genders, Romance languages. French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. Latin had three genders. The neuter was lost grammatically in all of them. Dutch and Swedish have both done a fun thing whereby they formerly had three genders, but the masculine and feminine genders collapsed together grammatically. So the masculine and feminine articles and inflections came together to be what is called the common gender. And then there's neuter, not uncommon, but neuter. So in Dutch, for instance, de man and de vrouw, the man, the woman, but het meisje, the girl, is neuter. De auto, the car, het huis is neuter, so the car is common and the house is neuter. Dutch has gendered masculine and feminine and neuter pronouns. Hij, zij, het. Swedish likewise, which puts the definite article on the end of the word, so mannen, the man, kvinnan, the woman, en and an, that's as much difference as you get. Barnet, the child. Bilen, the car, which is common. Huset, the house, which is neuter. Meanwhile, in a language such as Anishinaabe, they have animate and inanimate gender. Gender is not masculine and feminine, it's does it move or not, which seems to me a perfectly reasonable distinction right up until you start dealing with sushi. But it generally works. So, Aao inini and iil magazine. Aao, that is animate, and iu, that is inanimate. Likewise, even the conjugations reflect whether you're dealing with an animate or inanimate object. Igwezens niwabama, I see a girl. Jiman niwabandan, I see a boat. So a girl, igwezens, a boat, jiman, you can see, I see niwabama, niwabandan. The way you see is different depending on whether you see an animate or inanimate. An interesting fact, as a slight digression, in Hebrew, you conjugate your first person verbs differently depending on whether you're male or female. I learned this when I was visiting Israel, and I found out that if I wanted to order, say, the schnitzel, I would say, ani rotze hashnitzel. But if I were a woman, I would have to say, ani rotzat hashnitzel. English doesn't do that. Some languages have three genders. German, as we pointed out, the man, masculine, the woman, feminine, the child, neuter. Icelandic, likewise, the man, maðurin, konan, the woman, in versus an. This is an actual gender distinction. And barnith, the child. Russian, Polish, and other Slavic languages also have a three-way distinction. What they don't have is definite articles. So I can't illustrate with the, but you inflect the adjectives likewise. So small man, małe człowiek in Polish, mała kobieta, small woman, and małe dziecko, small child. Notice in each one of these, children are neuter. Many languages have more than three genders grammatically. Dionebal, which is a language of Australia and is spoken by very, very few people these days, is famous for having one gender which was summarized as being women, fire, and dangerous things. That's the title of a book a guy wrote on it. They have four genders, one of which is women, water, fire, violence, and some animals. Another one is man and most animate objects. A third one is edible fruits and vegetables. They get their own gender. I guess that's one way of indicating quite clearly whether a fruit or vegetable is edible or not, just by the pronoun or something. And one for everything else. Luganda is the official language of Uganda, and it, like many other African languages, has a system of noun classes which are effectively equivalent to gender grammatically. And it has a lot of them. There are basically 10 classes, but because they treat singular and plural as separate classes, you could say they have up to 17 classes. But they divide things not into masculine, feminine, and neuter, but into a class that includes people, one that includes long objects, one that includes animals. I don't know where they put dachshunds, therefore, long objects or animals. Miscellaneous objects. Large objects and liquids is a whole class. So if it's a long or large object, I'm sure they have a way of distinguishing. Small objects. Languages have their own noun class. By the way, Africa has a very, very, very large number of languages. And it's normal in Africa to speak multiple languages because you don't have to travel very far to meet people who speak a different language. Pejoratives, meaning you use a different noun class if you want to say, if you're saying, oh yeah, I saw his car, versus, oh yeah, I saw his car. In English, we use intonation. We say, oh yeah, I saw that jalopy, that flivver, that other antiquated word for a bad car. Infinitives and mass nouns. But in all of that, there's only one third person pronoun. So, yes, that's not the way languages are at all. How about reality? The next silly argument. That's the way reality is. It's just he and she and it, and we have to use the right pronoun or else. Well, if gender is inherent, we've already come up against the issue that in Old English we treated ships as one gender, boats as another gender, women as neuter, children in modern languages still often treated as neuter. So let's just say that cars are naturally one gender though. Well, which is it? Feminine, la voiture, neuter, das Auto, or masculine, el carro, el coche, el automóvil. In Spanish, is an office masculine, el despacho, or feminine, la oficina? Why are some things in Italian masculine in the singular but feminine in the plural? Lips, un labbro, due labbra. Fingers, un dito, due dita. Several words are feminine in the plural and masculine in the singular in Italian. So much for the inherency of gender grammatically. Do animals, by the way, have strict gender roles? There's been some talk about lobsters and other animals having very strict gender roles. Let's just move away from grammar for a moment to talk about this. Same-sex sexual interaction has been documented in over 450 species. And Peter Buchman says no species has been found in which homosexual behavior has not been shown to exist, with the exception of species that never have sex at all, such as sea urchins and aphids. About 10% of male domesticated sheep prefer sexual interaction with other males. Macaques and bonobos have regular female-female intercourse. Here's the thing about why everybody thinks that animals are always just males maling malely and females femaling femalely. It's the way they documented it. It's before it hit the page, they already decided that males male malely and females female femalely. Among giraffes, the male, if the male was sniffing the female, it's like, oh, he's sexing her. But if the male was actually getting it on with another male, oh, this was just, revolving around dominance, competition, or greeting. This was not sexual behavior. So a main reason that a lot of people think that that's the way it is because people decided that's the way it was and they were going to record it that way. They tortured the data until it confessed, basically. And beyond that, we're still saying, okay, male and female, male and female. Are all animals dioecious? Dioecious is a delicious word that means having two houses, usually meaning male and female. Well, a plague on both your houses. Many invertebrates are trioecious, male, female, and, well, both. Ciliates, some ciliates, which are very, very small, have 7 sexes. 7. By any way that you can define sex in a microorganism, they have 7 of them. Fungi, mushrooms, slime molds, have up to 36,000. I don't know how that works, but I've never seen mushrooms doing anything other than being fried. How about humans? So there's the idea, first of all, that we are made male or female, and that is that. Data already show that that's only usually the case. Only usually. I am put in mind of, for instance, Caster Semenya, an Olympic athlete who was disqualified from running in the women's events because they determined that while she appeared on the outside to be female, she had testes instead of ovaries and therefore must be masculine and have more testosterone. It's a problem because there are actually quite a lot of people like that. And an issue is that they're saying, well, you know, you got too much testosterone. But it's a little rough because testosterone levels vary widely from person to person, even in distinctly male or female persons. And if you're going to penalize somebody for having really good biology, then you've just destroyed the Olympics. Number one rule, every runner who's a serious runner will tell you that if you want to be a really good runner, the first thing to do is choose your parents wisely. So it's very difficult to say, well, you've got to be this way or that way, and if you're somewhere between, well, we can't deal with it, well, deal with it. Beyond that, socially, the idea that our societies are always males maling malely and females femaling femalely is also not true. Leaving aside many well-documented cases of people managing not to do that, even in European society, which had determined that that's exactly what they should do, many other societies have never done that. For instance, in Sulawesi, the Bugis people, who are the dominant people on the southern end of Sulawesi, which is a lovely big island in Indonesia, have 5 social gender roles. They're what we would call cisgender women and cisgender men, transgender women and transgender men, and androgynous shamans. And these are all accepted gender roles. There are up to 5 gender roles among the First Nations of North America. In the Anishinaabe Ojibwe people, there are 3 social gender roles, male, female, and two-spirit. And understand that two-spirit is a different gender role from any specific gender role that we have in white culture. A person who is white and say, well, I'm two-spirit, will very quickly be corrected by somebody who's Anishinaabe because the social entailments and complications of that and the background are not exactly the same. Even in, oh boy, Albaniana. Somebody get me an editor. There is a third well-established set gender role called sworn virgins, women who chose not to get married but instead to live as men. They had to swear to be celibate, and after that they were accepted and treated as men. So, although having been born women. So enough with this humans being one way or the other way. That too is torturing the data until it confesses. Last silly point. It would be a free-for-all otherwise. Well, there have been a lot of alternative pronouns proposed. Aside from the singular they and them, which runs into the one problem that you don't know whether it's singular or plural, which occasionally can be a point of confusion that you have to work around. Others have been proposed as early as 1884, phone. 1973, actually I'm not sure whether that's pronounced Z or she. A, per, ve, hu, e, ze, je, yo, pe, ho, have all been proposed. And I think that there are some people who have requested other ones. The question is, why should we have to remember all these? Well, let me ask you, why do we have to remember to call me doctor because I have a PhD instead of Mr.? Why do we have to remember to call my wife Ms. as opposed to Mrs. or Miss? She asks for Ms. We ought to remember to call her Ms. Why? Because it's polite, that's why. Why do we have to Remember to call Sir, Lord, Count, Viscount, Duke, Your Eminence. People who are royal watchers really get this stuff right. The protocol is very exacting. The honorable, the right honorable, the wrong honorable, the left honorable, Esquire, QC, OC, CC, IDK. We somehow managed to remember all these titles. We also managed to remember that my name is James, not Jamie, not Jimmy, not Jim. Most people do. My cousin, she gets a pass. She's been calling me Jamie since I was a kid. I was Jamie until I went to high school. I went to a different high school from everybody else I was with, and I decided this is my chance to make a break for it. I'm going to be James. I introduced myself to everybody as James, and that was it. If I get to change my name, why is it so much trouble to accept that other people can change their names? If a co-worker I had whose name was Rich decided to change his name to Mark because Richard is not in the Bible and Mark is, and we thought, well, I wouldn't change my name for that reason, but you changed your name and you're asking me, so I'll call you Mark now, even though I used to know you as Rich. Why is it so difficult to remember Chelsea Manning, Caitlyn Jenner, Wendy Carlos? I don't know if you know who Wendy Carlos is. Switched on Bach and Switched on Bach wrote the Moog synthesizer, early synthesizer music. Played, you've probably heard it sometime without knowing who played it. The early albums were credited to Walter Carlos. The later albums to Wendy Carlos, the same person. So, I think Wendy Carlos is still alive, and it would be unspeakably rude to call Wendy Carlos Walter. Some people have a problem with that alone, that specifically. Why? Because they think somebody is trying to put something over in them. What? They think let's just be honest, their dominant paradigm, their tidy way of organizing the world as male and female with male on top is being challenged. That's it. So, it's not a hidden gender. When you say they, you're not hiding gender, you're respecting it. It's respecting differences and choices rather than eclipsing them. It's not hiding everything behind a two-value system with one as dominant. And it's not a hidden agenda. It's a very open agenda. Treat people with a bit of respect. It's not really that hard. It doesn't actually hurt you to use a singular they or to use another pronoun. And the fact is that even professional editors, the Associated Press Manual of Style, many other style guides are agreeing singular they is a perfectly reasonable thing to use in any situation where he or she is not necessarily appropriate or accurate or clear, and he or she would be clunky. This is something that professional editors are greeting enthusiastically. It makes life easier. It makes it more helpful. It makes it easier to treat people with equality and respect. So, I apparently talked faster than I did during rehearsal, and I've come up in less than an hour, which means we have more time for discussion.